Who is the biggest UFC star in 2026? At first glance, it seems like a simple question, but right now, the answer isn't so obvious at all. The UFC recently announced something we've never seen before, a fight card at the White House featuring Alex Pereira and Ilia Topuria. Yes, that White House, a fight card with political symbolism, massive media attention, and global curiosity, even if there were no fights announced, which raises an interesting question. If the UFC already had a historic event that would sell no matter what, why put two of your biggest stars on the same card?
Alex Pereira is a huge star for us. Topuria, John Jones is still the best ever.
And more importantly, who actually is the biggest star in the UFC today? If we're being honest, the conversation probably comes down to four fighters. Alex Pereira, Islam Makhachev,
Black belt, who give him?
Ilia Topuria, and Khamzat Chimaev.
I come here for everybody, kill everybody!
Dana White says Alex Pereira is the biggest star in the UFC, but Dana is a promoter first, and what he says publicly isn't always the full truth.
When are we gonna see women in the UFC, man? Never? Never?
Pereira is the perfect company fighter, active, exciting, always ready to save a card, and never difficult in negotiations. So when Dana praises Pereira as the biggest star,
he's one of the most unique guys we've ever dealt with.
Part of that might simply be negotiation strategy. Some fans will immediately ask, what about Sean O'Malley or Charles Oliveira? Both are extremely popular fighters with massive fan bases, but there is a reality in combat sports. Once you lose the belt, the hype, unfortunately, drops. There's only been one real exception to that rule in UFC history, and that is Conor McGregor. Conor wasn't just a champion, he was a phenomenon. A fighter who didn't need a perfect opponent. He didn't need a stacked card, and he didn't even need the belt to sell an event. When Conor showed up, the show sold itself. Conor once said the UFC never placed him on mega cards.
They don't usually put me on UFC 200 or 300 or the Sphere.
Because those cards were already guaranteed to sell. Instead, they built entire events around him and his name, often filling the rest of the card with fighters who were still unknown to most fans. The weigh-ins alone for a McGregor card could sell more tickets than most title fights. That's the level of superstardom Conor reached. Right now, no one in the UFC operates on that level, but several fighters are getting close in their own ways. If we look at social media numbers, Islam Makhachev and Ilia Topuria both sit at around 13 million followers. Khamzat Chimaev is close behind with around 12 million followers, and Alex Pereira has roughly 8 million. On paper, that might make Pereira look like the least popular of the group, but numbers don't always tell the full story. Pereira has something much harder to measure. Aura. Sorry for the TikTok word. But he barely speaks English, rarely says anything complicated in interviews, and yet his presence alone creates attention. Sometimes he only says one word.
Sure.
And the promo is already done. Fans understand the energy without the long speeches. Ilia Topuria, on the other hand, approaches fame very differently. He is extremely calculated when it comes to building his image and name. In many ways, he studied the McGregor blueprint, the confidence, the tattoos, the sharp trash talk, the attempt to dominate every press conference he's a part of. Sometimes it works perfectly. Sometimes it feels slightly forced. Outside of the spotlight, Ilia is actually a respectful and calm guy, but when the cameras turn on, he tries to step into the role of the villain. He even organizes press conferences dedicated entirely to himself, invites journalists, insults half the roster, especially Islam Makhachev and Dagestan, and then disappears again for months. Topuria has openly said that he only fights when he feels 100% ready, and that level of inactivity limits how much momentum he can build. Talking about inactivity, Khamzat Chimaev presents another interesting case. Early in his UFC career, he became famous for fighting constantly. He broke the UFC record to become the first fighter to fight twice in 10 days. Now, the situation is almost completely reversed, and he fights about once a year. Still, Khamzat maintains a powerful aura because he remains undefeated, and in combat sports, an undefeated record always carries enormous value. Then, there's Alex Pereira, whose rise in the UFC might be one of the fastest and most remarkable we've ever seen. Unlike many stars, Pereira doesn't have a perfect record. His MMA record is 13-3, which almost looks like the record of a prospect just starting their UFC run. But the speed of his climb was extraordinary. It took him less than 2 years after his debut to become a UFC champion. Of course, his rivalry with Israel Adesanya played a major role in that story. For the first part of Pereira's UFC career, everything revolved around their history in kickboxing and the tension between the two. Eventually, Pereira suffered a brutal knockout loss to Adesanya in the UFC, the kind of loss that often kills a fighter's momentum. But instead of fading away, Pereira moved up a weight class, won another championship, and continued fighting with incredible activity. He accepted short notice fights, helped save several UFC events, and became the type of athlete the promotion can always rely on. That reliability is one of the reasons that both the fans and the UFC leadership respects him so much. Now, he is chasing something unprecedented, a championship in a third weight class. Pereira looks to become the first triple champ of the UFC on the White House card itself. And then we arrive to Islam Makhachev. In many ways, Islam might actually be the most complicated star in the entirety of the UFC. Not because of his fighting ability, but because of his politics and perception. A Dagestani Muslim champion from Russia is not the easiest figure to sell for an event like a White House card. When a show carries that much national symbolism, the UFC will naturally lean towards fighters who are easier to present to an American audience. That doesn't take anything away from Islam's popularity or accomplishments, but it might explain why he's unlikely to be the face of an event like this, especially if the storyline ends with him dominating one of UFC's biggest American stars. But if we look closely at his career, Islam has been involved in some of the most exciting fights we've ever seen. He submitted Charles Oliveira after dropping him to win a title. He went to war with Alexander Volkanovski, and then a fight later, knocked him out. He also had a crazy war with Dustin Poirier. Although his striking has improved dramatically over the years, the real secret behind Islam's popularity might not even be his fighting style. It's his personality. Since the era of Conor McGregor, there hasn't been another fighter who creates as many viral moments as Islam does, almost accidentally. Islam often delivers jokes, one-liners, deadpan comments that spread across the internet instantly. One of his quotes,
"If you want your son high-level wrestling, send him 2-3 years Dagestan and forget,"
became one of the most famous lines in all of modern MMA. Even people who barely follow the sport know this phrase. And nearly every time Islam appears on camera, something memorable happens, whether it be him roasting DC or hanging out with Hezbollah. When you combine this sense of humor with his connection to Khabib and his massive support from Muslim audiences around the world, you begin to understand why his reach is so powerful and massive. So when we look at the entire picture, popularity, personality, activity, and global reach, the current hierarchy of UFC stardom might actually look like this. Islam Makhachev at number 1, Alex Pereira at number 2, Ilia Topuria at number 3, and Khamzat Chimaev at number 4. But the truth is, we may be watching a new era forming in real time. The Conor McGregor era, where one fighter completely dominated the spotlight, is likely over. Now, the UFC has several stars competing for that top position, each with their own style, personality, and fan base. And the answer to who is the biggest star in the UFC might reveal itself soon on the White House card itself. So what do you think? Who is the biggest star in the UFC world right now?